It was my grandmother's most prized possession, a gold necklace with a single ruby pendant that glimmered like an ember caught in eternal twilight. She called it the Heart of Zara, passed down for generations in our family, with a tale so ominous that it was treated more as a warning than a keepsake. As a child, I was told never to touch it. The heart carries a curse, my grandmother would whisper, her eyes clouded with fear. It binds itself to its wearer, and only darkness follows. Despite the warnings, curiosity simmered beneath my skin, and the allure of the ruby, its blood-red glow, grew with me. Years later, after my grandmother passed away, the necklace came into my possession. I didn't want it, not really. But when the lawyer handed me the intricately carved wooden box, I felt its weight both physically and emotionally. I thought about selling it, but something stopped me, a sense of guilt, of obligation. So I locked it in a drawer and tried to forget about it. That was until last summer. My fiancé Ethan and I had just moved into a house on the edge of a dense forest. It was old, creaky, and carried the scent of forgotten memories. Perfect. We thought, a fresh start away from the chaos of the city. As I unpacked my belongings, I came across the necklace. Wow, Ethan said, holding it up to the light. This is stunning. Why don't you ever wear it? I hesitated, torn between the myth and its undeniable beauty. It's cursed, I said, trying to laugh it off. Ethan, ever the skeptic, smirked. Cursed? Come on, Ava. It's just a piece of jewelry. You don't actually believe that, do you? I shrugged, but something about his dismissal made me reconsider. Maybe it was silly, clinging to an old superstition. Without another thought, I fastened the chain around my neck. The ruby felt cold against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. That night, I had my first nightmare. I was standing in a darkened room, the air thick with decay. Shadows writhed along the walls, whispering my name. In the center of the room was a figure, cloaked in black, holding out its hand. The ruby on my neck burned like fire as the figure stepped closer, revealing hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. When I woke, gasping for air, I found Ethan staring at me. You were talking in your sleep, he said, his voice uneasy. Something about the shadows. Are you okay? I nodded, brushing it off as a bad dream. But the nightmares continued, each more vivid than the last. The shadowy figure appeared every time, closer and more menacing. By the third night, I began noticing things around the house, flickering lights, doors opening on their own, the sound of faint whispers when no one was there. Ethan chalked it up to stress from the move, but I wasn't so sure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan found me sitting on the floor of our bedroom, the necklace clutched in my hands. We need to get rid of this, I said, my voice trembling. Don't be ridiculous, he replied. It's just a coincidence. You're letting your imagination run wild. Frustrated, I hurled the necklace into the drawer, slamming it shut. But that night, things took a turn for the worse. I woke to the sound of Ethan screaming. Bolting upright, I found him thrashing on the bed, his eyes wide with terror. A dark figure loomed at the foot of the bed, its shadowy tendrils reaching out toward him. The ruby pendant, though locked away, seemed to pulse with an eerie glow from the drawer. Ethan, I screamed, grabbing his arm. But he didn't respond. His body went rigid, his face frozen in a silent cry as the shadow wrapped around him. Desperate, I yanked open the drawer, grabbed the necklace, and ran out of the house. In the forest, the air was electric, crackling with an unnatural energy. I clutched the necklace, determined to end this once and for all. I reached a clearing and threw the cursed pendant onto the ground, grabbing a rock to smash it. But as I raised the rock, the shadows converged around me, forming into the figure from my nightmares. It spoke, its voice a guttural rasp. "You cannot destroy what binds you," it said. "The heart has chosen." Before I could react, the ruby shattered on its own, releasing a blinding light. The figure let out a deafening scream and dissipated into the night. When I returned to the house, Ethan was unconscious but alive. The ruby's glow was gone, its fragments dull and lifeless. Though the curse was broken, the scars it left on us were permanent. We moved out a month later, leaving the house and the memories behind. To this day, I can still feel the cold weight of the ruby around my neck, a phantom reminder of the darkness that nearly consumed us. When my mother passed away, the responsibility of cleaning out her old farmhouse fell to me. The house was a relic of her childhood, a sprawling structure with creaky floorboards, faded floral wallpaper, and the kind of eerie silence only places long forgotten could possess. I didn't grow up there, so the place felt more like a distant relative's home than a place to grieve. As I sifted through boxes of yellowed letters and cracked porcelain figurines, my eyes kept drifting to the attic door at the end of the hallway. It loomed, slightly ajar, its darkness beckoning me like an unspoken secret. My mother never mentioned the attic, and we'd rarely been allowed to explore the farmhouse as children. But now, the house was mine, and so were its mysteries. I climbed the narrow staircase, each step groaning under my weight. The attic smelled of dust and decay, a pungent mix of mildew and something metallic. Sunlight filtered through a small, dirty window, casting long shadows over the clutter. At first, it seemed like any other storage space: old trunks, broken furniture, and forgotten belongings. But then I saw it. In the far corner, propped against the wall, was a massive painting. The canvas was taller than me, its frame ornate and gilded, though tarnished with age. The painting depicted a dark, stormy landscape. Trees with gnarled branches bent under the weight of a violent wind, their silhouettes ominous against a roiling sky. In the center of the scene was a dilapidated farmhouse, eerily similar to the one I stood in. What struck me most was the figure in the painting, a shadowy figure standing in the farmhouse's doorway. It was faceless, little more than a smudge of black paint, yet its presence sent chills crawling up my spine. I reached out, almost involuntarily, and brushed the edge of the frame. A shock of cold shot through my fingers, so intense that I yanked my hand back. Shaking off the sensation, I decided to take the painting downstairs for a closer look. Dragging it to the living room, I propped it against the wall. The more I stared at it, the more unsettling it became. The storm seemed alive, the painted trees swaying as if caught in a perpetual gale. The farmhouse's windows glimmered faintly, like eyes watching me. That night, I slept fitfully. Dreams of the figure in the painting plagued me. It stood silently in the doorway, its head tilting as if studying me. Behind it, the storm raged louder, the wind howling with an almost human wail. When I woke, the house was deathly quiet. My phone, which I had left charging on the nightstand, was dead. The electricity seemed to be out, though the weather was calm. I walked downstairs, groggy and disoriented, only to stop dead in my tracks. The painting had changed. The storm was fiercer, the trees now bent at impossible angles, as though trying to escape the canvas. The figure was no longer in the doorway. It was closer, standing on the porch steps. I stared, my mind racing to rationalize what I was seeing. Paintings didn't change, they didn't move. Yet there it was, undeniable and horrifying. I decided I couldn't keep it. The painting was going back to the attic. As I dragged it up the stairs, I felt the air grow heavier, each step more difficult than the last. The shadows in the attic seemed deeper, the light dimmer. I propped the painting against the wall and turned to leave, but something stopped me. A sound, faint and low like a breath. I whipped around, my eyes locking on the painting. The figure was gone. Panic surged through me. I scanned the room, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing moved, yet I felt a presence, a cold, suffocating weight pressing down on me. And then I heard it again, closer this time, a rasping breath. I bolted, slamming the attic door behind me. Back in the living room, I tried to calm myself, convincing myself it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. By nightfall, I had convinced myself to leave the house. I packed a bag, determined to check into a motel and deal with the painting later. As I reached for my car keys, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Against my better judgment, I went to investigate. The attic door was wide open. My stomach dropped as I climbed the stairs, gripping a flashlight with trembling hands. The painting was back in the living room, propped against the wall where I had found it that morning. The storm in the painting was now violent, the farmhouse barely visible through the chaos. The figure stood at the edge of the canvas, 1 foot outside the frame. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my car, staring at the house until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I made a decision. The painting had to go. I drove to the nearest dump, the painting wedged in the back of my truck. Tossing it into the landfill, I felt a brief surge of relief. But as I drove away, a chill crept over me. In the rearview mirror, I swore I saw the figure standing on the side of the road, watching me leave. To this day, I don't know what became of the painting. I sold the farmhouse shortly after and never went back. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, I hear the storm, and I feel eyes on me. When I inherited my grandfather's farmhouse, I wasn't particularly thrilled. It was old, decrepit, and miles away from the nearest town. The place had been abandoned for over 2 decades, left to rot after my grandfather mysteriously disappeared. My family rarely talked about him or the house, as if it were a chapter best left unread. Still, I needed the money, and selling the farmhouse seemed like the quickest way to solve my financial woes. Before I could list it, though, I had to clean the place out. So, on a chilly Saturday morning, I packed some essentials and drove out to the middle of nowhere to confront my inheritance. The farmhouse was every bit as creepy as I'd imagined. The shutters hung loosely, creaking in the wind. The roof sagged under the weight of neglect, and ivy crawled up the walls like veins on an aged hand. The inside wasn't much better. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of damp wood and decay. I started in the main rooms, tossing out old furniture and collecting family heirlooms to sort through later. It was tedious work, but nothing I couldn't handle. That is, until I reached the cellar. The cellar door was tucked away behind the kitchen, a heavy wooden slab with a rusted latch. It took all my strength to pry it open, and the air that wafted out was cold and stale. like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The cellar was surprisingly spacious, filled with shelves of dusty jars and crates. But what caught my attention was a small desk in the corner. On it sat an old, leather-bound diary, its cover cracked and stained with age. Beside it lay a tarnished wall lamp, which I lit to get a better look. The diary seemed out of place, pristine compared to the rest of the cellar's clutter. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's handwriting, neat and precise. The entries began innocently enough descriptions of daily farm life, the weather, and occasional mentions of neighbors. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. The entries became darker, more frantic. My grandfather wrote of strange noises at night, shadows that moved on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. One entry in particular made my blood run cold. There is something in the cellar. It speaks without words, its voice a whisper in my mind. I've sealed it away, but I fear it's not enough. If anyone reads this, leave this place. Burn it if you must, but do not stay. I slammed the diary shut, my heart pounding. I wanted to believe it was the ramblings of a man losing his mind, but the oppressive silence of the cellar made it hard to dismiss. As I turned to leave, the lamp flickered. The light dimmed, casting dancing shadows across the walls. And then, I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. But it came again, more distinct this time. Leave. I froze, the diary slipping from my hands. The whisper wasn't coming from any one direction. It was everywhere, surrounding me, invading my thoughts. Grabbing the lamp, I bolted up the stairs, slamming the cellar door behind me. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath, but the whisper followed, faint and persistent. Leave ... now. I didn't sleep that night. The whisper continued, growing louder as the hours passed. By dawn, it was a chorus, voices overlapping in a maddening cacophony. I decided to burn the diary. If it was the source of whatever was happening, destroying it seemed like the logical choice. I built a fire in the backyard and threw the diary into the flames. The pages curled and blackened, the whispers rising to a deafening scream before cutting off abruptly as the book disintegrated. For a moment, I thought it was over. The silence was almost comforting. But then I heard it again, a single whisper, faint but unmistakable. You should not have done that. That night, the farmhouse came alive. The walls groaned as if the house itself was breathing. Shadows slithered across the floors and ceilings, their movements unnatural and deliberate. Objects moved on their own, a chair sliding across the room, a picture frame falling from the wall. And then there were the footsteps. They started in the cellar, slow and deliberate, ascending the stairs. The door rattled as if something on the other side was trying to get out. I barricaded myself in the bedroom, clutching a baseball bat I'd found in the hallway. The whispers were louder now, their words incomprehensible but filled with malice. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a fitful sleep. When I woke, the house was silent again, but the sense of dread lingered. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed what little I had brought and left the farmhouse without looking back. I sold the property as is, refusing to step foot in that cursed place again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear whispers, and I wonder if I truly left the curse behind. When When my best friend, Emily, invited me to explore an abandoned mansion deep in the countryside, I hesitated. Stories of the place had circulated for decades, a grand estate left to rot after its owners mysteriously vanished in the 1920s. Locals whispered about curses and restless spirits, but Emily brushed it all off as superstitions. "It's just an old house," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Think of the history we'll uncover. Maybe we'll even find something valuable." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and against my better judgment, I agreed. We arrived on a gray afternoon, the sky heavy with clouds threatening rain. The mansion loomed before us, its once beautiful facade now crumbling with age. Ivy snaked up the walls, and shattered windows gave the impression of hollow eyes staring down at us. As we pushed open the massive oak doors, the smell of mildew and decay hit us like a wave. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the broken windows, and the air was unnaturally cold. The foyer was vast, with a grand staircase leading to the second floor. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring down at us with lifeless eyes. It felt as though the house itself was watching. Emily, armed with a flashlight, led the way. She was fearless, moving through the darkened halls as if she belonged there. I, on the other hand, felt a growing unease. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the broken windows, made me jump. We spent hours exploring, finding little of interest beyond broken furniture and forgotten relics. Then we found the painting. It was in a room on the second floor, hidden beneath a dusty sheet. Emily yanked the cover off with a flourish, revealing a massive portrait in an ornate gold frame. The painting depicted a man in his late 30s, dressed in early 20th century fashion. His piercing blue eyes seemed to follow us, and his expression was one of smug confidence. There was something unsettling about him, though I couldn't put my finger on it. "This must be the owner," Emily said, studying the painting. "Look at the detail. This thing could be worth a fortune." Her eyes lit up with the idea of taking it, but I protested. "We shouldn't disturb it," I said. "What if it's part of the curse people talk about?" Emily rolled her eyes. "You're letting those silly stories get to you. It's just a painting. Besides, it's not like anyone's coming back for it." Before I could argue further, Emily had lifted the portrait off the wall. Behind it was a small alcove containing an old, leather-bound book. "Now this is interesting," she said, flipping through its pages. The book was a journal, filled with entries written in elegant script. Most of it was mundane accounts of daily life, business dealings, but the later entries took a darker turn. The mansion's owner, Edward Blackthorne, wrote of a deal he had made with a mysterious stranger. Desperate to save his failing estate, Edward had agreed to let the man paint his portrait in exchange for wealth and prosperity. But the man was no ordinary artist. He was described as otherworldly, his presence unsettling. After the portrait was completed, strange things began happening. Servants reported hearing whispers in empty rooms, and Edward himself claimed to see shadows moving in the corners of his vision. The final entry was a chilling plea. "The painting is cursed. To whoever finds this, leave it be. Destroy it if you must, but do not take it from this house." Emily laughed nervously as she closed the journal. "Well, that's creepy," she admitted. "But come on, it's just a story." Ignoring my protests, she carried the painting downstairs and loaded it into her car. The drive back to town was tense. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, though the road behind us was empty. Emily, on the other hand, seemed unfazed, already making plans to appraise the painting. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were filled with visions of Edward Blackthorne, his cold blue eyes burning into mine. I woke up drenched in sweat, only to find my room unnaturally cold. The next day, I called Emily, but she didn't answer. Concerned, I drove to her apartment. The door was unlocked, and the place was in disarray. The painting was propped up against the wall in her living room, and the air around it felt heavy, oppressive. "Emily," I called out, but there was no response. I found her in her bedroom, huddled in a corner, her eyes wide with terror. She was muttering something under her breath, over and over. "He's watching me. He's always watching." I tried to shake her out of it, but she was unresponsive. It wasn't until I moved the painting back to the car that she finally calmed down. I knew we had to get rid of it. We drove back to the mansion, the painting in the trunk. Emily was silent the entire way, her face pale and drawn. When we arrived, the house seemed darker, more menacing than before. We carried the painting back to the room where we'd found it and placed it on the wall. The moment we stepped back, the air grew colder. A deep, guttural whisper filled the room, a voice that was both everywhere and nowhere. "You should not have returned." The painting's eyes glowed, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, closing in around us. We ran. I don't remember how we got out, but we didn't stop until we were back in the car, miles away from the mansion. Emily moved out of town shortly after, and I haven't spoken to her since. As for me, I avoid anything that even remotely resembles Edward Blackthorne's portrait. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel his eyes on me. My name is Clara, and until recently, I considered myself a practical person, rooted in logic and reason. But logic abandoned me the day I encountered the cursed Weller story that still haunts me to my core. It all began when I moved to a quaint countryside village to escape the chaos of city life. The village, known as Hollow's End, was picturesque, surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods. My new home was a charming cottage on the outskirts, complete with a large garden and a beautiful stone well in the center. The previous owner had left in a hurry, selling the property for a suspiciously low price. I didn't question my luck. I was enchanted by the tranquility and the well, which added an old-world charm to the place. However, the villagers' reactions to my move were strange. They avoided eye contact and whispered among themselves when I walked through town. One elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson, was brave enough to approach me with a warning. "You should leave that house," she said, her voice trembling. "The well, it's not safe." When I asked her why, she only shook her head and muttered something about a curse. I dismissed her words as mere superstition. A cursed well. It sounded like something out of a ghost story. But soon, I would learn how wrong I was. The first few weeks in the cottage were uneventful. I spent my days tending the garden and renovating the interior. The well became a favorite feature of mine. Its moss-covered stones and wrought iron cover gave it a whimsical appearance. I often imagined it as a portal to a magical world. One evening, as I admired the sunset from my garden, I heard a faint whisper coming from the well. I froze, my heart racing. It was so faint that I thought I might have imagined it. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. The whisper stopped. The silence that followed was unnerving, but I convinced myself it was just the wind. The whispers became a nightly occurrence. They were soft at first, like a distant echo. but grew louder and more distinct over time. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, almost mournful. One night, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I removed the heavy iron cover and peered inside. The beam of light disappeared into the darkness, revealing nothing but an empty void. The whispers, however, intensified, filling my ears with a chorus of desperate voices. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight into the well. As it fell, the light illuminated something movement. It was brief, but I was certain I saw a pale hand reaching up from the depths. Terrified, I replaced the cover and ran inside, locking all the doors. That night, I barely slept. The whispers were louder than ever, and I swore I heard scratching at the windows. The next day, I went to the village library to research the well's history. Hidden among dusty records, I found an old journal written by a man named Elias Grayson, who had lived in my cottage over a century ago. Elias wrote about how the well was once a site of pagan rituals. Villagers would make offerings to appease a malevolent spirit that dwelled within. When the practice was abandoned, the spirit grew vengeful. It lured people to the well, promising them their deepest desires, only to drag them into the darkness. Elias's final entry was chilling. I hear her voice every night, begging for release. She promises power, wealth, and immortality, but I know it's a lie. I've seen what she does to those who listen. God forgive me, I sealed the well to protect others, but her whispers grow louder. I fear she will not be contained for much longer. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the whispers began again. This time, they were accompanied by a distinct voice, soft, melodic, and undeniably female. "Clara," it called, sending shivers down my spine. "I know what you desire. Let me grant it." I tried to ignore it, but the voice grew more insistent. It spoke of my innermost fears and desires, things I had never shared with anyone. It promised to take away my pain, to give me everything I had ever wanted. Desperation and curiosity drove me back to the well. I removed the cover and peered inside. The voice was louder now, clear and inviting. "Come closer," it urged. "I can help you." Before I knew it, I was leaning over the edge, drawn by an invisible force. Suddenly, a hand shot up from the darkness, grabbing my wrist with icy fingers. I screamed and yanked my arm back, falling onto the grass. The hand retreated, but the voice turned angry, its tone venomous. "You cannot escape me, Clara. You are mine." The ground around the well began to tremble, and a shadowy figure emerged from the depths. It was a woman, or at least what was left of one. Her skin was pale and cracked, her eyes hollow pits of darkness. I stumbled backward, my mind racing for a solution. Then I remembered Elias's journal. He had sealed the well with an iron cover to trap the spirit. I grabbed the iron lid and pushed it over the well just as the shadowy figure lunged at me. The moment the cover snapped into place, the figure vanished, and the whispers stopped. For a moment, all was silent. Then the ground stopped shaking, and the air grew still. I fled the cottage that night, leaving everything behind. The villagers didn't seem surprised when I returned to town, pale and shaken. They knew the curse couldn't be escaped, only endured. To this day, I don't know if the spirit is truly trapped, or if she's merely waiting for her next victim. One thing is certain, I will never go near that cursed well again.